Okay, so let's talk about the Great Migration. Now, the Great Migration really actually starts during World War One because a lot of those factory jobs in the North have been opened up because the white men have been sent to Europe to go fight. And while African American people or men are allowed to join the military, they're not allowed to fight. And they are not accepted as part of the military. They are not um, sent overseas. So a lot of black families move to the north during the end of the 19 teens for open jobs because a lot of jobs have been left behind. And that's not the only reason, but that is really our kickoff. And then the Great Migration that continues during and after World War One is this continued migration of African Americans moving from the South up north. But there's, again, it's not just the jobs. Any time you face a migration or some sort of period of massive changes, there's always the push and pull factors. And we talked about push and pull factors way back when we were talking about Chinese exclusion, but this internal migration also has push and pull factors. So a lot of the pull factors for the North, besides the jobs, there's better housing up north. There's less by the law segregation. A lot of family and friends have already moved north. Agriculture is not doing well in the South in this time period. They've been hit by the boll weevil. The farms are being destroyed. There's drought. So it's tough to be a farmer in the South. Many African Americans are moving north for those things. The push factors are the things that are happening in the South. The boll weevil, the drought, the agriculture that's not great. That's pushing people out of the South. And the de jure segregation, the Jim Crow laws, lynching. There's absolutely no protection for African Americans in the South. They're living in fear of their lives every day. So a lot of people, temporarily at least, want to leave this behind and go make a better life for themselves up north. The goal is not to move north forever. Migration of this kind is not meant to be forever. It is temporary to make money and then better yourself or your situation so you can go back south and buy better land and build a better house and move into a better area. But it ends up becoming permanent for a lot of families. And even though there's no legal segregation in the North, a lot of African Americans are facing the same discrimination that they would in the South. It's just less legal. So they're still going to get pockets of black neighborhoods and black families that aren't allowed in certain places. And you can see a lot of people go on trains, obviously, because where else are you going to go? We don't have commercial airlines yet. They may drive, but most people are taking trains. Chicago is one of the big places, Philadelphia and Harlem, New York. Harlem will actually become home to a much bigger movement that spins out of the Great Migration. But I would say one of the biggest push factors of the Great Migration from the South is the resurgence of the KKK. Now, we talked about the KKK when we talked about Reconstruction. They are one of the many white supremacy groups that had existed at the end of the Civil War, and they would go around terrorizing freed people and Northerners who had come down to the South to help with Reconstruction. And then they kind of died out for a while. But there's an extreme resurgence of them in the 1915 to 2030s region. And it's a lot bigger in the Midwest, actually, this time. It's also in the South, but it expands up to the Midwest as well. And part of it is due to the Birth of a Nation film that is a film based on a story called The Last Klansman. And the movie is made, it's a full-length movie about essentially the Klans being a hero The Klansmen are these big heroes. They save a white woman from a black man, and it's absolutely as terrible and as racist as it sounds. But President Wilson holds a screening of this at the White House. And so he's really enabling people to join the Klan and saying, like, it's okay. So the Klan really resurges in the 1915, 1920s, and they're a lot more violent than they were in the 1860s and 1870s. Not that they are, they were violent in the 1860s, but they are now more violent, and they have a lot more connections now. Because in the 1860s and 70s, they were really confined to the South. And people outside of the South were kind of like, looked down on them, like, like those are the Confederate rednecks, like, like let them do their thing. But the Klan of the 1920s is much more powerful. A lot of the men are involved in government. They get their wives involved. They get children involved. The second time around, it's a much more American thing than it is a Southern thing. So they start to tie the Klan into being American. And you have to be Christian. You have to be white. You have to have these moral, kind of like the traditional way of life of America is really what they're looking for. And if you're a good American Christian, you're joining the Klan. It becomes this really big push. There's a Klan parade in Washington, D.C. They carry American flags. They don't have their own identifying flag. They are firmly American. And a lot of people, regular citizens, join the Klan to be part of a group, to be American, because nativism is also rising. This concept that, like, what is it to be an American, and how do you be an American? How do you prove you're an American? Well, what better way to prove you're American than to join the Klan? Because if you're not going to join the Klan, then you must not be American, which means you're an outsider, which means we don't want you, so now we're going to target you. So the Klan of the 1920s is arguably even scarier than the Klan of the 60s and the 70s, because they're a lot more powerful, there's a lot more people involved, and they're really pretty unstoppable until one of the leaders of the Klan in, I think it's Indiana, gets caught up in a scandal where he is accused of raping and murdering a young woman, and eventually gets caught that he did do it. And that's really the downfall of him. If you want to read about that, there's a fantastic book by Timothy Egan called Fever in the Heartland. Timothy Egan writes some really great historical novels. They're not fiction, but they're really well written. So they read kind of like a story rather than a historical. They're not a trudge, but Fever in the Heartland is really good. It's all about the Klan, the rise of the Klan in the 1920s, and this man, this very powerful man, and how he's taken down by this woman who does die, but not before she gets her testimony out, which is amazing. He also writes The Worst Hard Time, which is a great book about the Dust Bowl, so I recommend both of those. Again, he has a lot more, but those two are my top two right now. So the Klan is everywhere. It's pretty inescapable, especially if you're black. And they're still lynching. They're still burning crosses on your front lawn. They're a lot more formidable now in the 1920s than they were in the 1860s, which leads to part of that red summer that we will talk about in the next video, where there are an aggressive amount of riots where lots and lots of people end up dead all in one summer due to racism and nativism and clannish values that have just run rampant across the United States. And that's a tough one to handle. So we will stop here, and then we'll talk about the Red Summer, and then we'll move into a little bit more uplifting experience for African Americans when we get to the Harlem Renaissance.